From Washington, D.C., welcome to the Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin and Bob Marks.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your host, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
This week's Alumni Show is brought to you by Bill Houghton, insuring standardbreds and farms for over 40 years. 954-655-5547. That's the number you call for all equine insurance. Bill knows the ins and outs of equine insurance. With this year's new increased online bidding and new protocols in place, make sure your equine investments are protected. Call or text Bill at 954-655-5547. That's 954-655-5547. Call Bill now. Joining us today as a returning guest is Standardbred breeder and owner Andy Cohen. Andy has some important information for the harness racing industry. Andy, welcome back.
It's good to be back, guys. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Andy, last week you attended a Zoom meeting with Travis Tygart, the CEO of USADA, and you discussed the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. Can you tell us about the meeting?
Sure. I think it's important. What we did as a group of people within the harness racing community, Linda Toscano, my friend and trainer, Hall of Fame trainer, Steve Stewart, a breeder, one of the largest in the country, folks who put together that open letter last month that basically encouraged people within our industry to have open minds about this new federal legislation, to try to get more information about it, to urge the USTA to negotiate in good faith over joining it. We had an opportunity to get information, to become less ignorant about what's in this law and what's not in this law, and to learn more about how the law is going to work. And we took that opportunity. So we had a 1 hour conversation with Travis Tygart. He's basically going to be in charge of enforcing the new rules that are going to come into place under this new federal legislation, which was enacted by Congress and signed into law by President Biden. And so we were able to ask him questions that we know members of the harness racing community have. We were able to ask him about LASIX. We were able to ask him about the costs of testing. We were able to ask him if he envisions the idea or recognizes the idea that standardbreds are a different breed from thoroughbreds and thus might need different medication rules. And so all of us had, I think, a very productive conversation. We got answers to many of the questions that we asked. We also got answers from Travis which were candid in the sense that he said, I can't tell you that right now. And, of course, he can't tell us some of the answers because the authority, which is going to be created by this law, hasn't yet been set up formally. The people who are going to be running the show haven't yet been identified. So he's sort of waiting for his bosses to come into place, but he was able to, give us an idea of what he envisions these testing protocols to look like. We certainly left the door open for another round of discussion. And that's why Steve and Linda over the weekend in Harness Racing Update sort of gave an update to the community to basically say, look, last month you asked us, you guys who signed the letter, there's 200 people, some of the most prominent people in our sport who signed this open letter. We wanted you to know that we've actually, continued to work on it. And so what we're trying to do now is get people from the industry to send Steve Stewart their questions. If they could ask Travis Tygart a question about harness racing and USADA, what would it be? And we're going to try to get those questions answered because we think it's critically important for people to understand what this law is and is not about. What we have learned is that the more people understand what this law is, the less likely they are to follow in lockstep with Joe Feraldo and Russell Williams, who we think are leading the industry over the cliff.
Do you feel that there's going to be uniformity with the thoroughbreds and the harness racing industry as this bill goes forward?
Well, I think that the presumption right now is uniformity because that's just the way that the law is written. It was designed to try to create some uniformity from jurisdiction to jurisdiction so that, the rules are the same for everyone and that the bad folks in our industry the folks who are cheating can't sort of hide away in jurisdictions that are less lax than other jurisdictions. So that's the starting point. And I think most people would agree that uniformity from state to state is a good idea. Where people begin to disagree, right, is in the details of what that uniformity looks like. There are some folks who think that there should be uniformity with very lax rules. And obviously, a lot of people believe, as I do, that there should be uniformity with rules that are stricter to try to catch more of the people who are doping horses and otherwise cheating. So the starting point is uniformity, but one of the things that Tygart said was that he recognized, as we all do, that there is language in this law that acknowledges the possibility that different breeds would be treated differently. And so what harness racing has is the opportunity, as this goes forward, to make its best arguments for why its medication rules can be or should be slightly different than the rules that govern thoroughbred racing. We don't have a guarantee that that pitch is going to get sold, right? We don't have a guarantee that everything we ask for when we ask for differences is going to be approved, but we know that we are going to get a hearing, a fair listening to when we present those arguments. And of course, if those arguments are sound scientifically, it's going to be hard for the federal agency to reject them.
And I know that Travis also brought on Tessa Muir, Dr. Tessa Muir, and she also answered a lot of questions regarding medications and stuff also. Any comment on some of the things that she said?
Yeah, well, I think Tessa is an interesting person in this dynamic. She knows, I think, a lot more about horse racing and horses than Travis Tygart does. And I think she's going to be instrumental in guiding him as the USADA goes forward. She also told us, to our relief, that she has some experience with Standardbred. So she's going to be a pivotal person, maybe even a point person that we can go to or talk to as harness racing tries to figure out ways to make their argument for why a medication rule should be tweaked or can be tweaked. There are avenues of opportunity here that I think are very important for us to recognize. And I think that's one of the failings of the USTA, that it has been so opposed almost philosophically to this that it has closed its eyes to the possibility of learning more about it and trying to work its way into it. One of the things we learned is that USDA leadership hasn't even reached out to Tygart to try to learn some of the things that we learned, to try to ask some of the questions that we asked, to better educate themselves before they threatened litigation or before they initiated litigation or whatever it is they're doing, which is disappointing. You would think that a best practice for management in a situation like this would be to try to get information and touch base with the key figures in a moving drama like this so that they can make more informed decisions, but that has not happened.
And what do you think of the USDA's challenge of the bill being unconstitutional and the pending lawsuit coming up?
Yeah, I don't know, because I haven't seen the lawsuit. The one other thing I want to say just before we move off of Tygart is a lot of people are fearful within our industry of the cost of this testing. And one of the arguments that comes up, right, one of them is LASIK, one of them is the cost. Well, the argument goes from the USDA side of the fence here, harness racing owners and trainers are going to get hammered with these additional costs of testing. We asked that question of Tygart, and his response was really interesting. The presumption that the fact that there's going to be federal oversight now means there's going to be more testing or more expensive testing isn't necessarily true. What Tygart is saying to us is that there's going to be smarter testing. So maybe there isn't going to be continuous testing of, the first and the second and third place finishers. Maybe there's going to be more out-of-competition testing and less race testing. The idea of being leaner and meaner and smarter in testing not only is designed to capture more crooks in the sport, but also could be economically, positive. In other words, we assume that the costs are going to go up, and they may, but they may not. And right now, I think the figure was $44 million is being spent on testing already. That number doesn't go away. That's going to be applied to whatever the cost is of the new testing. So the idea that there's necessarily going to be some huge additional tax, whether it's per race or per start or whatever, just simply isn't being borne out by what we're being told. And, of course, the devil in the details is going to come from negotiations between this authority that's going to get set up and the thoroughbred industry and, hopefully, members of the standardbred industry who would be willing to, come to the table.
And he also said that each breed is going to pay for their own costs. It's not going to be us covering the thoroughbreds.
Right, and that's in the language of the statute. That's not coming from him, him deciding that. That's actually in the language of the law. So that you're right. That's another idea or notion that we were able to sort of dig into a little bit to try to, sort of deflect away some of the fear that surrounds this law. The folks who oppose it, some of the folks who oppose it, just simply haven't taken the time to look through it and to read about it and to get different opinions on what it means. They're following Joe and Russell, who are the leaders of the USTA, but they're following them in a way that they're missing out, I think, on context and perspective that I think makes this law a lot less scarier and makes the alternative worse. The alternative here, if the USTA, I suppose, wins its lawsuit, is we're going to be where we are today, which is with these very ineffective state racing commissions, or maybe even worse than we are today, because we will have been identified as the one breed or among the breeds that refused federal regulation. And I think that hurts us with local politicians, many of whom now control the fate of purse subsidies in places like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They're not going to be happy, I don't think, if there is a fight over federal legislation. I think they're, by and large, pleased that the feds are going to take over some of this stuff. So it's very complicated, and we thought that one of the ways to end up at a better place in all of this is to get more information and to educate ourselves and to actually talk to the people who are going to begin to be responsible for shaping this law. And that's what that initial conversation was about last week, and that's what hopefully our next conversation is going to be about as well. We'd like to try to get USTA leadership on that next call with Tygart. We presume that they'll act in good faith and ask good faith questions of Tygart, and we'll have to see how that goes.
Right. And also in this meeting, there were some people from some other organizations in there. The Jockey Club was there. The Animal Wellness Group was there. And also the Coalition for Horse Racing Integrity was having it on the meeting, too. So it wasn't just, just the USTA with USADA. Not the
exactly. Exactly. It wasn't just the Standardbred community. And
right.
It was a very productive meeting. I think the folks who were on it would agree that, Tygart is interested in horse racing, has some good ideas about how to effectively do what he does best, which is to find patterns and practices of cheating and expose them. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be able to have the authority to do some things that just aren't being done right now at the state racing level commission. We should all be applauding that because, that's something most people agree the sport desperately needs. Most people agree, if you ask them, that the state racing commission scheme underway now just isn't working. It's not working from state to state. It's not working at individual tracks, and the sport is suffering as a result of it. And, of course, the other thing to say, and we have talked about this before, the USDA never talks about the costs of not doing this. The cost of not joining this law and not allowing ourselves to have our testing protocols improved and tweaked. I think those costs are pretty significant, especially if the Standardbred community becomes sort of a symbol of opposition for the federal law. I think that would be really, really tough on the industry going forward, especially with animal rights groups and, as I said, with lawmakers.
Yes. And Andy, I think that we've given a good message out there, and I'm basically going to close the show out now. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think that's very informative for the harness racing industry.
Well, thank you, and thank you guys for highlighting this. It's as you guys know, it's very difficult to present an opposing view in our community when the USTA is on the other side. We've seen that at the recent board of directors meetings. A lot of these directors have voted in favor of litigating this law, in favor of suing the federal government, basically, without really understanding what the law is, and without wanting to accept invitations to learn more about it. And that's disappointing, and we're hoping that we can change that one person at a time.
Absolutely. Andy, don't go away. If you're buying or selling your home, Joe Rico is your go-to guy. Joe has been representing buyers and sellers on Long Island for 30 years. He is an expert in all types of sales. Don't settle for average. Call or text Joe Rico today at 516-524-4870. That's Joe Rico at 516-524-4870. That's a wrap for this week's show, and don't forget to tune in next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show